Welcome to Verify This, a podcast brought to you by Candatis. We deliver bespoke identity and access management solutions leveraging the Microsoft Entra product family. Our solutions are designed to simplify onboarding, enhance security, and boost business efficiency for clients globally. Throughout the series, we'll connect with leading experts across the industry to bring you insight on all things digital identity. Hear about trending issues, lessons learned, and priorities for the future within identity verification and authentication.
With the upcoming of AI, deepfake, there's so much new types of fraud that might be occurring. COVID has proven that if something happens, even governments can actually move fast.
Welcome to our latest episode of Verify This. I'm your host, Lucy McNeil, Product Marketing Lead at Candatis, and today we have the pleasure of being joined by Dick Dekkers, Digital Identity Consultant and Strategic Advisor. Having worked for Digidenitity for over 10 years, specialising in population scale identity services such as gov.uk Verify, Dick has spent the last year spearheading his own digital identity advisory, Magpie Bridges, tackling complex challenges across identity, biometrics, standards, and compliance. Welcome, Dick. Today, we're going to be talking about digital identity in the context of government and the complexities that can surround that. So, to date, we've covered a variety of topics within identity verification and authentication. We've looked at travel and education and the future of what that holds. So we're really excited to have a specialist such as Dick to walk us through his experience and key challenges and observations within the government sector and his experience there. So firstly, it would be great to start off hearing a bit more about how you got into the world of digital identity. You've worked with a variety of industries among government and clearly been part of some exciting projects, as I mentioned, gov.uk Verify, just as one example. So how did you get into this field? You know, where's the passion come from?
Yeah, so I started back in 2008 with Digidenitity, and we had some sort of view on the future of, that it would become increasingly important to know who you're dealing with online. With the uprise of social media and all these different interactions with people that you hope they are who they say they are, but in practice they typically aren't. So we started working on all kinds of solutions, varying from identity verification to digital signatures. And right from the start, we thought this needs to be a reusable identity. Turns out we were way too early. But we were working on the Dutch national ID, which was actually a reusable identity called Digidenitity. And then, as you said, gov.uk Verify, which came in quite early, actually. So we've been working with government as a provider, but also as a sort of sparring partner and in a public-private partnership very early on. And over the past, I think, year or so, things have really changed with the IDAS 2.0, getting a lot of traction, in some cases rightfully, in some cases it's a bit, people have heard about it, but don't necessarily quite know what it is. With the upcoming of AI, deepfake, there's so much new types of fraud that might be occurring, an increase in fraud even, and I think there's also on the good side of these technologies, I mean, personal assistance, your identity sitting in the background. I mean, it's very exciting times.
Yeah, I think definitely. I mean, it's aligned to the conversations I've had to this point where there's so much new stuff happening and it can be exciting, but definitely the narrative is the good and the bad with that element of deep fakes. And I think, I don't know if I actually saw it through being connected with you on LinkedIn, but somebody, I think maybe there was a screenshot, where you have to prove you're not a robot and that you're not the captcha, and somebody showed it to like an AI platform and they guess it. They get the code right.
The AI said something along the lines of a human would be only a human could read this, but it actually says, in case you want to know, and then
in case these are the letters. And you're thinking, oh no. I mean, to be fair, the ones you get that ask you to like click the boxes as to where the traffic lights are, they are hard. Even I get them wrong. But scary stuff. So very relevant. But I agree with everything you say in terms of what makes it exciting. And I think certainly within some industries, with travel, I think they're a bit more further forward in appreciating the benefits of digital identity. You're seeing more use of decentralized identity and that priority for privacy and transparency. If we think about government, and it might be the wrong perception, but if we think about government, there are a lot more factors at play when it comes to data management, because I think it's an example where it's not one organization dealing with their customers or a subset of audience or staff. It's a much greater open ecosystem when you're thinking about citizenship, for example. What have been some of the challenges that you've observed that government entities face when looking at a digital transformation?
There's a quite a variety of things. So first of all, I think there is a bit of a knowledge gap to where the industry has evolved, where consumer or citizen needs are actually are, and then the interaction between different government departments. Um, I mean, so the government has a few different roles that they need to set, and I think they are very passionate about doing that, but they still live in silos quite a lot. So you see, there's a bunch of people that are typically quite good at technology. Then there's the regulatory bodies. Then there's a different department that actually owns the thing, right? For identity, for example, in the Netherlands, it's the Ministry of the Interior. But everything related to businesses is with economic affairs. And then there's a different set where the regulatory bodies sit, and all three of them have to interact and preferably go at more or less the same pace. And I think that's what's really challenging at the moment, when there's a threat and an increased requirement for digital services. Right? We've seen COVID, we've seen how vulnerable member states can be in terms of elections. We have the European elections now, and all I read about in the news is the potential threats from the outside of the EU about influencing all the elections. So I think there's a threat angle to it, but also just a requirement from the public who want to do everything online instead of going to a municipality and try to do stuff based on real paper.
Yeah, I think that was certainly going to be a question I had for you is very maybe comes more naturally for your eye to think about digital transformation and the benefits that it can unlock for users to own their own data and access what they need to access and share however much they want to share. From like a citizen perspective, is there a desire, do you think, for digital transformation as well? I mean, if you looked at a proportion, you know, is it larger, the majority that people are aware of digital identity, digital credentials? I mean, I think the argument could potentially be you don't know what they don't know, and they're maybe using Apple ID to store certain credentials like a boarding pass and not appreciating that this is an example of digital identity and digital transformation. Do you think they're ready for governments to make these changes? Like if we think about EIDAS coming down the road.
Interesting. So, fair point about people basically not being aware of the fact that they're using a digital identity. Everyone talks about the EIDAS wallet as revolutionary, which in a way it is for identity, but people have been using Apple wallets and Google wallets for the past years, but probably never linking that to the fact that if it can hold a credit card, why not my driving license or even a passport for that matter? But concert tickets were perfectly fine with storing in that specific wallet. So I think on the one hand, people are not aware of how close they already are to the concept. There is a group of people that is very reluctant, very weary about government control, and basically saying it's going to be like other parts of the world where there's a lot of big brother is watching you. If I walk past a red traffic light, I'll be fined. Will be basically anything I do will be monitored based on that single identity, and then combined with the thought of a digital euro, for example, people are very concerned. There's also a group of people who actually see the benefits of something like this. And I think there has been a shift in the way people perceive data with the upcoming of GDPR. People became very much aware of what is out there and how it's being used. In some cases with your consent, some cases, most cases probably without a very clear consent, or at least you're not aware of the fact that you gave consent. But people are slowly understanding how much data can do and how much companies actually can do for you. So not necessarily monetize everything from you, but imagine having a sort of a personal assistant, an identity that sits in the back and facilitates all kinds of things. So where it actually becomes relevant. One of the best examples, I think, with putting data to use is the way, for example, the Dutch tax authorities have a pre-filled income tax application. So they get it from like 700 different sources. So you log in with your account, and then you see everything from your income to your savings to all kinds of different sources being utilized. And unless you have very specific things, it's basically just hit OK, and it's sent off, and you're done in 5 minutes. So I think there's a lot of potential, and people starting to see that potential.
Yeah, I think it's what, coming back to that example, I think I had a conversation with this about Alistair, and when we were doing the future of digital identity, was before, the concept of even just using your thumb to unlock your phone was like groundbreaking. And then it moved to Face ID and your biometrics. And now that's just second nature. And I imagine that's where we would get to when we see more government institutions taking more of a or making more of a digital transformation. We spoke about briefly the environment that if we think of government, obviously encapsulates so much. You mentioned that they all sort of somewhat siloed in ownership and responsibility, and the scale is very large. If we're looking at the operability, this was something that came up in my conversation with Dr. Keith Luke, where they're dealing with institutions, educational institutions across borders, and how they deal with interoperating with different rules and regulations and legalities. And I suppose this comes up within government as well, is how do you make things like this interoperable? And I guess it comes down to standards. So if we think, I believe Canada has just released a new standard. We've mentioned the eIDAS 2.0 that's coming, and organizations are expected to be ready for that within 2026. I mean, what's the role of standards with digital transformation? How important are they, and how ready, are governments, and how prepared are they, and what work needs to be done, do you think, to be ready for that?
So standards are tremendously important. Without standards, there is no interoperability, and without standards, you can't have digital identity or probably any technology at scale. If there's not a common understanding, not a baseline understanding for everyone, it won't work. However, just with standards, that doesn't cover all your needs. So I think that when you compare, for example, the DITF in the UK with the eIDAS 2.0, the difference with the eIDAS, it also covers the legality of things. It covers liability. There's a very clear different part associated with the eIDAS than just technology or definitions. And I think both are equally important. One of the big differences, for example, between the eIDAS 1.0 and 2.0 is that they've extended this to private sector use. So it's not only the citizen to government across the member states, but it also concerns private sector. And there's a mandatory acceptance of wallets for financial services, for health, a variety of scenarios, large scale platforms like Amazon and Google. So I think that creates that creates the scene for actual adoption. So the standards are important to make sure that everyone understands what goods looks like, what you need to provide, what will come, but it won't necessarily just that increase the adoption. Then in terms of, if you look at governments, they have a role to play with developing the standards. They have a role to play when it comes to regulatory oversight, so supervisory. It has a role to play in making data become available. So I think there's a tremendous need for governments to make data about the citizens available, and make it reusable. So, for example, under the IDAS, you need to have personal information in your wallet, and that is basically the starting point of your identity in the wallet. Governments should be able to push that, right? We've in the Netherlands, we've got a really good database of all citizens with their name, address, and date of birth. If you could just pass that into that wallet, which in the Netherlands we can, you have a great head start, instead of like in the UK where you would have to start from scratch with everyone. So you have to ask for their driving license or their passport, and then they need to prove that they're a live person, and you need to combine the two, which works from a technology perspective, but from a UX, not really a smooth journey. So governments have to make information available, work on the standards and the governance, and then try to facilitate or stimulate adoption and a widespread set of services that actually make it worthwhile doing. So, for example, your mobile driving license is typically a government thing to sort out, right? The standards are there, so they need to start working on how to come into that digital era and fill that wallet with relevant information about the individual.
Yeah. And yes, that preparedness. I mean, if we think about private sectors perhaps being a bit more advanced in terms of skill set, is there much to be said for there being a gap within this sector versus other industries that might kind of slow that down a bit or make things, much more complicated? Is that something you see? Is there a lot of priority to hire for these skills within the sector? I mean, everyone can appreciate everyone's always trying to place budget everywhere for the right places and the important things. Do you think digital transformation there's an investment there within that industry, or do you think they're, especially with what we've just discussed, this evolution coming, to be ready for these changes, to be knowledgeable about these changes, to make sure that they're set up for what's going to be happening?
There's a lot of awareness, both within public and private sector, and I appreciate that there's different reasons for them to find it challenging to adapt and adopt. Governments have different roles and responsibilities, need to handle with care, where businesses, for example, have to fundamentally change their way of looking at business. And if you're an e-commerce website, and part of your model is based on the fact that you have a lot of data about an individual, right, with or without consent. Let's park that for now. But if that is the case, and then all of a sudden it becomes about data minimization, and you don't no longer hear who the buyer is, but you only know that they're over 18, right? That changes your model. Also, there's a lot of technology companies that are looking for reach. So they have good technology, but they don't necessarily have the reach or the brand awareness. And then there's a whole bunch of brands out there that think, I should play in this space, but I have no clue how or what's coming. But this might be a model for me. You see the moves with banks and post offices, quite traditional lines of business starting to consider changing their model and services. Um, and then in terms of allocated budgets, I think generally speaking, it's not enough. I think they underestimate most of the costs involved with changes like this. So it's not only implementing a new API that allows you to log in with a different username and a password, right? But it's, if you truly want to transform, it's from culture all the way down to technology, and has impact on um, revenue streams, margins, resources, so hiring and firing. It impacts on liability, right? Do you have the right insurance? Does need to be a different legal entity? I mean, it's so widespread. I don't think that most of them um, have a good view on the effort involved, and particularly with multinationals. The smaller companies, I think, have a fairly good sense, but the bigger ones, no, you see one or two people in the innovation team making plans about this for 2026.
Yeah. I think you touched on a good point. We've referenced certain countries that are really investing in a digital transformation. And I was going to ask, why do you think other countries might be less inclined to prioritize that in their outlook? But actually, we've listed a lot of steps that need to be taken. So I imagine there's quite a bit of reluctance there because it can seem like you're reinventing the wheel. There's a mindset of, I think I've said this before on Verify This, if it isn't broke, don't fix it. And so there's almost an awareness piece that needs to happen, I think, to talk about the possibilities, but also dig in more to how, with the right standards, with the right skill sets, interoperability and setting these new digital identity processes up doesn't have to be so difficult, but I suspect it can sound quite big and scary and just like there's loads of other priorities, let's not deal with it. But I think when we think about GDPR, that was the same perspective. And then it came out of nowhere. And then everyone was like, oh my gosh, we're not ready for this. So I don't know if you would agree with that sentiment, but that's my sort of perception that there's a reluctance to change.
I think there's so first of all, there is a reluctance to change, and second, there typically are, like you said, so many different things that require their immediate attention, particularly from politicians themselves. Right, there's a whole governmental layer and different departments underneath that probably have a sense on all of this, and I also see the need. But as long as the minister in charge doesn't say, well, is going to be delivered in the next 2 years, off to the next big thing. Um, there's quite a few countries that have a very good solution implemented currently, and you see that happening for all kinds of different reasons. So you could be threatened by another state somewhere across the world, right? If you've had a large cyber attack, um, then you understand the need of resilience of your infrastructure. If you have a country that has a big spread of the population, so it's not as easy to bring people into a tax office, for example, then it makes sense to find alternative ways of serving your population. Um, in some cases, it's also cultural. So you see, for example, if you look at the Nordics, Denmark, but also the Netherlands, we're very used to the fact that government holds information about you. So we're perfectly fine with a government database. Um, in Denmark, you can use your social security number equivalent for almost anything, right? Because it's a unique identifier, and no one is really reluctant about using the thing. Um, basically, all the Napoleon countries have a pretty decent database of their citizens, and we don't mind. So it's also a cultural thing, probably, but unless something happens, there will always be different parts of the world or different countries that have a reluctance. And that what could happen could be regulation like GDPR or now EIDAS 2.0 or the Data Services Act in the EU. It could be a cyber attack or whatever outage. COVID, I think, is a clear example of all of a sudden there was an immediate requirement to start working from home, signing remotely. The digital interaction became the top priority, and that is quite a sticky thing. So post COVID as well, you see that everyone understands there could be this one little thing, relatively little thing happening, and then all of a sudden we are in serious trouble. So we need to get this sorted. And so that has accelerated a lot.
I think you make such a good point, especially with the COVID example. I mean, we went from, sort of never having to log into really to any sort of government portal, maybe unless you lost your national insurance card that gives you your national insurance number, to a point where, okay, when restrictions lifted, in order to go into a bar, you had to show a QR code. The QR code, if you took a screenshot, it locked you out of the app because they wanted to prove this is to prove you've had your vaccination, for example. And everybody did just accept it. I mean, people were feeling a certain kind of way after being locked down for so long, but I think you're right. I think there's a stickiness, but almost it shouldn't have to get to a point where there is a scenario like that to have to retrospectively retrofit your solutions to be ready for that and actually create a digital identity environment that's almost future proof. That's going to be able to adhere and plug in with changes that might come their way. So I think you raise a lot of very good points there. It's not going to be easy, of course. You know, it's easy for you and I to sit and debate this and have a conversation about it. But I think that's the important thing, is these conversations should be starting to be discussed. I think what I'd be curious to know from yourself, you know, kind of coming to a close on our discussion, is, do you have any examples of lessons learned, or what could be avoided in terms of the future, or mistakes, or what can we learn from? And maybe it's you know, your reference to COVID in that example, but is there anything that stands out to you that we should take into account when looking at this industry?
One of the things, particularly for governments, right? What I think they should do, and there are quite a few examples out there of where they actually did that or still do, is stay engaged with the industry. Talk about the people who are at the forefront of innovation. You don't necessarily have to adopt all of that, but just be aware of what is out there before it's basically too late and everything has been rolled out and everything is used to something and then you're lagging. The second thing I would say is be transparent. On the government projects I've worked on, if there was, let's say, mutual trust about what you were doing, what we're trying to achieve, but also the challenges that you face, I think that really is an important thing, because your suppliers, the people you work with as a government, can help you if they know what your problem is. Typically they're quite capable of, but if we would do this for you, would that actually help you engage with, you know, a different department, or would that solve it for you? And industry can move typically much faster. So try to see what you can do there by being honest and transparent. The second thing, or the last thing, and the third thing I would say, is explore and experiment. COVID has proven that if something happens, even governments can actually move fast, right? You can get this sorted. And yes, I understand some sort of potential regulatory restrictions, or that's all fine. But at least from an understanding of future and technology, just do stuff. If you experiment, you explore, you keep on having that conversation, you can actually keep up with a decent pace. And I think governments sometimes underestimate themselves and actually lean into the cultural thing of, but we're government, we can't move that fast. Well, you can. It might be challenging to get everyone on board of that mindset, but I think it can definitely be done.
Yeah, I think you're right, is that don't underestimate, you know, what we've seen when things need to move quickly. Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us today about this kind of topic, challenges, observations. I mean, we could talk at length and there's so many side streets we could go down as well. For anyone that has any questions for Dick, please do reach out via LinkedIn or send an email to dick@magpiebridges.com. We hope you have enjoyed listening in today, and stay tuned for more exciting discussions as we verify this.